We welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on the unconstitutionality of President Obama's executive actions on immigration, and I'll begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. Last November, President Obama announced one of the biggest constitutional power grabs ever by a president. He declared unilaterally that, by his own estimation, almost 5 million unlawful aliens would be free from the legal consequences of their lawless actions. Not only that, by granting them deferred action, he would bestow upon them benefits such as legal presence, work authorization, and access to the Social Security Trust Fund and the Earned Income Tax Credit. President Obama took these actions despite having stated over 20 times in the past that he didn't have the constitutional power to take such steps on his own. As the Washington Post's own fact-checker concluded, apparently he's changed his mind. The Constitution is clear. It is Congress's duty to write our nation's laws. Yet President Obama admitted that, "I just took an action to change the law," quote unquote. The Constitution is also clear that once laws are enacted, it is the President's responsibility to enforce them. The Constitution requires the President to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Yet the very integrity of our immigration laws is now in question. 26 states believe that President Obama's actions would cause them irreparable harm. They challenged his grant of deferred action in federal district court in Texas. The court agreed with the states and has granted a temporary injunction halting for the moment the administration's plans. The court stated that the administration is, quote, "not just rewriting the laws, it is creating them from scratch," end quote. President Obama has justified his actions under the guise of prosecutorial discretion. Law enforcement agencies do have the inherent power to exercise prosecutorial discretion, the authority as to whether to enforce or not enforce the law against particular individuals. However, telling entire classes of millions of unlawful aliens that they face no possibility of being removed is not prosecutorial discretion. It is simply an abdication of the executive branch's responsibility to enforce the laws. The President relies on a memo prepared by his Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel to attempt to justify his actions as constitutional. But that very memo finds that, quote, "immigration officials' discretion in enforcing the laws is not unlimited. Limits on enforcement discretion are both implicit in and fundamental to the Constitution's allocation of governmental powers between the two political branches," end quote. The memo admits that the executive cannot, under the guise of exercising enforcement discretion, attempt to effectively rewrite the laws to match its policy preferences. And the memo quotes the Supreme Court's Heckler versus Cheney decision in stating that the executive branch cannot, quote, "consciously and expressly adopt a general policy that is so extreme as to amount to an abdication of its statutory responsibilities," end quote. The memo, in fact, is an indictment of President Obama's actions. The federal court in Texas agrees. It found that the grant of deferred action, quote, "does not simply constitute inadequate enforcement. The government here is doing nothing to enforce the removal laws against a class of millions of individuals. The grant of deferred action does not represent mere inadequacy. It is complete abdication," end quote. And the court points out that President Obama's actions go beyond even utter non-enforcement. He is, in fact, granting affirmative benefits to these aliens, as I described earlier. In absolutely no way can President Obama's actions be considered a justifiable use of the administration's powers of prosecutorial discretion. They are a clear violation of his constitutional responsibility to faithfully execute the laws. The President also mistakenly claims that his actions are nothing new. It is true that previous presidents of both parties have provided immigration relief to groups of aliens. However, most often the actions were based on emergencies in foreign countries, thereby relying upon the broad constitutional power given to a president to conduct foreign affairs. For example, Chinese students were protected from deportation after the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989. What about President George H.W. Bush's family fairness policy, which the White House cites to justify its power grab? This grant of voluntary departure was in fact authorized by the Immigration and Naturalization Act as it existed at the time. without any crisis in a foreign country to justify his actions, and in granting deferred action without any statutory authorization, President Obama has clearly exceeded his constitutional authority. No administration has so abused and misused the power of prosecutorial discretion as has the Obama administration. By assuming legislative power, the Obama administration is driving full speed ahead to a constitutional crisis, tilting the scales of our three-branch government in his favor and threatening to unravel our system of checks and balances. This administration has entered the realm of rewriting the laws when it can't convince Congress to change them. The House of Representatives has taken decisive action this year to protect the Constitution. We have passed a Department of Homeland Security appropriations bill that would defund a series of unconstitutional actions of the Obama administration, including this grant of deferred action. Tragically, the House-passed bill is being filibustered in the Senate, even as appropriated funds for the Department are set to run out at the end of the week. By not even allowing the bill to be debated, those senators who have chosen the path of filibuster and obstruction are threatening DHS's access to funds designed to keep Americans safe. They are also denying the American people a fair debate on this vital issue of whether Congress needs to take action to protect all our constitutional liberties. We can only hope that they will relent in time. I look forward to today's hearing and the testimony of our witnesses, and it's now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, for his opening statement.